Live from London, this is the Iran War Today on BBC News, and over the next half hour or so we'll be bringing you all of the key updates on day 34 of the war. Well, let's start with today's main developments. A search and rescue operation is underway after a US fighter jet was shot down over the west of Iran. Donald Trump says the US could easily open the Strait of Hormuz, take the oil and make a fortune with a little more time. Iran carries out further attacks on critical infrastructure in Gulf states, damaging a desalination plant and a refinery in Kuwait. As both sides continue to hit civilian infrastructure targets, legal experts express concern about violations of international law. Well, we begin with the ongoing search and rescue effort for a downed US fighter jet in southern Iran. US media reports that one crew member has been found and rescued, while the fate of the second remains unknown. If it's confirmed the aircraft was struck by enemy fire, it would mark the first such incident involving a US jet since the start of the war. Iranian state media have published pictures and videos apparently showing parts of the downed plane and one of the ejector seats. Images posted later on social media and verified by our American partner CBS News show a refuelling plane and two helicopters flying low over Khuzestan province, consistent with a search and rescue mission. With us is Mikey Kay, military analyst for the BBC's Security Brief programme. Mikey, first things first, what does an F-15 do?
Yeah, so I think it's the letter on the end that's really important because there are different variants. This is the F-15E Echo, and why that's important is because it's a two-person role aircraft. So you'll have a pilot in the front, you'll have a weapons system operator called a whizzer in the back. I think we've got a picture of the F-15E here. What's interesting about this aircraft is that it's multi-role, so it can do air-to-air and it can do air-to-ground. We know that these F-15Es are from Lakenheath. They've been deployed into the region. We've been covering out on Security Brief on what assets have been deploying in, and we know F-15Es have been operational most days. There's been
That's the east of England?
Yes, near Cambridge. Exactly. And we know that these aircraft have been involved in many operations, but specifically what's called drone cap, which is drone combat air patrol. So these aircraft will get airborne in pairs and they'll look for the Shahed 136, that V-winged drone that we've been talking about coming in, and they'll be used as a counter defense to that. So yeah, that's the F-15E and likely or most probably from RAF Lakenheath.
What more information then can you gather from seeing the debris?
So I've been poring over this on open source intelligence before we've had more corroboration. If we can go back to that picture of the jet, what I've been trying to do is unequivocally be able to say that the debris is commensurate of debris from a jet like that. It's from the 494th Fighter Squadron, which is based at RAF Lakenheath. I want to draw the viewer's eyes in to the rear of that shot. This is a better picture. So it's Lima November. That's just the code for the aircraft. Top of that, you've got the top of the tail fin on the left-hand side, and you've got a badge on there which says USAF in Europe, and then you've got a red stripe. Now, if you go to the shots of the debris that have been, and if we can just pause on that for a second, you can see the red stripe on the top of what looks like a tail fin, and then there's also footage of that badge down below, certainly on a second image. So I can highly likely say, but looking at that debris and looking at the squadron, the 494th that it was from, that aircraft is likely connected to an F-15E from RAF Lakenheath.
Yeah, you could see the word Europe on that crest that you mentioned.
Exactly.
So the claim is that it was shot down. That's the most likely explanation?
We don't know it was shot down. It's certainly come down in Iran, but there are a number of potentialities. So, yeah, it could have been taken out by a surface-to-air missile, a man-portable air defense system, that small surface-to-air missile that a troop carries. But it could have been friendly fire. We've already seen 3 F-15Es shot down by a Kuwaiti F-15 earlier on in the war. Again, we don't know that. Or it could have been a technical problem. So there are eventualities. I mean, you could probably say that the likelihood is that it's been shot down, but we can't unequivocally say that at the moment.
So if they ejected, what's that process like? It can't be a gentle process to go through.
Yeah, I mean, the highly likelihood is they would have ejected. And that is the last case scenario for a crew in an aircraft that can't fly. So irrespective of what happened, and we don't know that yet, ejection is the last ditch scenario for a crew if the aircraft cannot maintain itself being airborne. And it's it's not a decision that is taken lightly by a crew, because the process is quite brutal. The ejection seat will be punched out of the airplane at around 25 G, and it's going into a forward airflow of probably greater than 300 knots. So that in itself is going to be quite brutal on the body. The legs and the arms of the crews will be pulled in by straps that are automatically part of the ejection process. They'll also probably have a 9mm short-barreled weapon, which is all they will have to defend themselves. And then once the seat comes out of the aircraft, depending on what height it's at, it's got a barometric gauge. So if it ejects below 10,000 feet, then that barometric gauge will automatically shoot the ejection seat off. So they've gone through that part, which is brutal in itself. But then you've got to look at what type of terrain they're landing on. So if they're landing on, ideally they're landing on something flat, something relatively soft, a field would be great, or even sort of a dusty area. But if what they're landing on is a mountainous terrain or a forest, for example, then obviously that can create sprained ankles, broken limbs, parachute snagged in forest, and that then becomes a real problem for the next phase, which is these crews need to be mobile to go into hiding.
And how does the search and rescue operation work then? They've got to locate them and then actually retrieve them.
Yeah, so I think we've got a visual here of what's called an HC-130J. So that's a Hercules aircraft that's in the front of that package, and then behind them, two HH-60 Jolly Green 2 aircraft. The HH-60 Jolly Green 2, I don't know if you've got a picture of that, but it's basically a Black Hawk variant that has a refueling probe on it that allows missions like this that go deep into enemy terrain. There we go. So you can see the refueling probe on the front. It'll also be kitted out with forward-looking infrared and all-terrain radar, which will allow them to fly in inclement conditions. And what we saw there, these crews, they're called combat search and rescue. These crews having to go into a environment that is non-permissive, which means there's a threat there, and fly in daylight. They're likely going in with another package as well, which would be a fighter escort package. And that could be anything from other F-15s or the A-10 Warthog that we've seen, to basically lay down suppression of enemy fire, or basically just pave the way to make sure that they can identify and locate. Yeah, that's an A-10 Warthog there. We've already seen 12 of those arrive through the UK, and they're on the way to the region to join another 6. I think there's 18 total. We've seen these aircraft being used in operations against Popular Mobilization Forces, which are Iranian-backed proxies in Iraq, but also across the Strait of Hormuz. So, one of these aircraft could be used in that package, or it could be an F-15. But basically, that Hercules and those two Black Hawk Jolly Green 2s will likely be accompanied by something that will give them a bit more safety.
What does all this tell us about just how superior the US is in the air?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We're hearing about the US talking about air superiority. Air superiority is a doctrinal term that allows US aircraft to fly pretty much unhindered in an enemy environment. Now, I've flown in non-permissive environments, but thankfully there hasn't been that manpad threat. With Iran, we know that they've got the manpads are pervasive, and I think what's important from the American perspective is not to miscalculate the air superiority term in terms of how much they fly, at what level they fly. So in terms of what threat, we call it threat bands. And depending on what level you're at, there are certain threat bands that if you position yourself in, you become vulnerable to heavy machine gun fire, or vulnerable to a manpad threat, or a tracked surface-to-air missile system. And so there are various threat levels. And I think, if I was an American commander, I certainly wouldn't be putting aircraft in the 500-foot or 2,000-foot region, because that air superiority thing doesn't apply to these man-portable air defense systems. So again, we don't know that it was shot down, but we do know that the Iranians have a lot of these manpads, and so therefore, in terms of risk-off situations, massive caution should be taken.
Mikey, as ever, thank you very much. Mikey Kay. Well, let's get the view now from inside Iran. We've been monitoring official media outlets, and they say a substantial reward has been set for anyone who finds the pilots alive. Let's speak to Gonche Habibi-Azad from BBC Persian. This is the Persian language service of BBC News, used by 24 million people around the world. The majority of them are in Iran, despite being blocked and routinely jammed by the Iranian authorities. Gonche, what's the reaction been in Iran then to the downing of this American F-15?
Well, when it comes to Iranian officials, the latest reaction that we have seen, and the most prominent one, has been from Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, who has mocked the US in a post on X. And Ghalibaf hasn't been seen since 17 March on state TV or in public, or we haven't seen much photos from him or anything that he has appeared in public. But in the post, he has mocked the US and he has said that you were talking about regime change, now you're looking for your pilot. And what he means by regime change is a reference to when Donald Trump was saying that there was a regime change and leaders in Iran have changed. But certainly the leaders in Iran have been targeted, including Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on the first day of the strike. Beside that, I'm also getting some views from people inside the country about the pilot and what has been going on and what they're saying. It's just very much limited. I'm hearing from a limited number of people, and Iran is under an internet blackout right now. So these views are from people who are connected via Starlink, most of them, and using or possessing Starlink, which is satellite internet in Iran, can lead to up to 2 years imprisonment for them. What they have been saying is that it's just very confusing. We don't know much details, obviously, from what is happening yet. But among one or two of them, they fear that if this has happened, and all of them are anti-establishment, all of the people that I talked to, and that if this has happened, it's going to be like a major victory in a sense for Iran, and Iran also has a history of taking hostages. So we don't know if they're going to find a pilot, if what's going to happen, if there is a pilot in Iran. There's so many uncertainties and so many things that we don't know yet about what has happened.
Gonche, for the moment, thank you very much. Gonche Habibizad from BBC Persian. Well, Iran continues to retaliate and wreak havoc on its neighbours. Strikes and interceptions have been reported in Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Our correspondent Lorna Gordon joins us now from Dubai. Lorna, bring us up to date then with the latest Iranian strikes across the region.
Yeah, the Gulf states are on the front line of these Iranian attacks, which it says are in retaliation for strikes on it by Israel and the United States. The latest barrages seem to have focused on oil and energy infrastructure. One of Kuwait's largest oil refineries was targeted. The refinery was attacked by drones for the third time in the war. An energy and water desalination plant was also damaged in a different attack. Well, here in Abu Dhabi, operations were suspended at its biggest natural gas processing facility after falling debris there started a fire. You know, military authorities here in the UAE, here in the Emirates, say that they, over the last 24 hours, have engaged with more than 20 missiles, a mixture of cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, and almost 50 drones. That is the highest figure in a number of weeks. And, you know, it comes just after President Trump threatened a further escalation in attacks. And you can't help but wonder if Iran, with this latest round of attacks, is in reply sending a message of its own right back.
Lorna, for the moment, thank you. Lorna Gordon in Dubai. Let's turn now to another front line of the war. Israel's military says it struck 3,500 targets in Lebanon since hostilities with the militant group Hezbollah resumed a month ago. The UN says Israel's ground invasion of South Lebanon has displaced more than 1 million people. Our correspondent Lena Sinjab has the latest developments from Beirut.
I'm not sure if you can hear the drone, the sound of the drone, Israeli drone is flying over. You can hear it almost in every part of the city, which means an imminent attack is going to take place. We're not sure where exactly. These are the sounds of war that the Lebanese are living with day in, day out. Sometimes they know where the target is heading. Sometimes they have no idea. In the south of the country is the most dangerous situation as Israel continues to attack villages in the south, giving warnings to many residents to leave. Hezbollah on its side is also firing rockets into Israel, defying and saying they will not stop this war. Many residents are trapped in the south of Lebanon despite statements from the Israelis of expanding the buffer zone, what they call a security zone, reaching north of Litani River. Today is a Good Friday, and for many Christians, thousands of Christians, those who are trapped in the south, they won't be able to celebrate. They've made it clear they're not leaving their towns, they're not leaving their villages.
Well, the UN Security Council will vote tomorrow on a resolution put forward by Bahrain that authorises member states to use all defensive means necessary to secure transit passage in the Strait of Hormuz for at least 6 months. Meanwhile, 100 experts in international law are warning of serious violations by the US, Israel and Iran. They say the initial attack on Iran was a clear breach of the UN Charter. They also highlight what they call the alarming language used by US officials, including Donald Trump. The White House insists the US campaign is making the region safer. Tom Fletcher, the UN's humanitarian chief, explains just how concerning the situation is.
This has been a gradual and then very sudden deterioration in the way that we talk about protection of civilians, the way that we talk about international humanitarian law. This stuff isn't negotiable. You don't hit civilian infrastructure. That includes hospitals, across Beirut and across Lebanon. I met huge numbers of medics whose ambulances are being hit at the moment. You don't hit schools. You don't hit energy sources. You don't hit bridges. Those are war crimes. That is absolutely clear in international law. But somewhere along the way, we seem to have thrown that all aside, and we've chosen impunity, indifference, game show gambling over solidarity and humanity.
Tom Fletcher. The war in Iran has had a dramatic impact, of course, on the price of oil across the world. Iran's grip on the strategic shipping lane of the Strait of Hormuz is giving it a chokehold on oil and gas supplies vital to the global economy. Our Asia business correspondent Nick Marsh has this analysis.
When the price of oil goes up, the price of pretty much everything goes up, because you need oil to power factories, you need oil to transport goods. It factors into the price of jet fuel. So if you're flying in food, for example, that could also go up, and then you start getting all these inflationary pressures. Even things like fertilizers, for example, they're stuck near the Strait of Hormuz. Liquefied natural gas as well. You need that to make fertilizers, you need that to power things. So when there's a disruption to that supply, not only do you have an immediate issue when you're scrabbling around for actual supplies of fuel, you've also got the problems associated with the increased price. At the moment, Brent crude, which is the global benchmark that we use to measure the price of oil, it's at around $109 a barrel. It is very, very high indeed. We've seen the price go up, we've seen the price go down, but quite slightly, really, in relative terms. It's usually linked to what the US president says in terms of signaling that the war might come to an end soon, or in the case of Wednesday when he gave his primetime address from the White House, that there really was no end in sight, no actual concrete update on just how the war would end. So traders are looking at that picture and they're thinking there's going to be a really, really prolonged disruption, prolonged blockage in the Strait of Hormuz. And as long as that is the case, the price is going to stay very, very high indeed. I mean, even if the United States walked away from this war, it declared victory or whatever it wants to do, the Strait of Hormuz doesn't necessarily just open up immediately. That takes weeks and weeks and weeks. It basically is completely under the control of Iran. So it then becomes a diplomatic effort to try and reopen it. So this is a big shock. I was just looking at some new data from S&P Global that looks at spot prices of oil. So the actual here and now of what oil is being bought for, because don't forget, the Brent crude prices that we talk about, they're futures contracts. So they're contracts for oil at a fixed price to be bought in the future, so in a couple of months' time. The actual prices now of what oil is being bought and sold for is much, much higher, $140, the highest since 2008, higher even than the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So businesses are feeling the impact massively, but when businesses feel impact, ultimately that means people are feeling the impact.
Nick Marsh. Well, that impact is acutely being felt in Asia, where many nations are highly dependent on imports of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. In Pakistan, the government has raised petrol prices by a further 43%. Caroline Davies reports from Islamabad.
This is a dramatic increase in the price of fuel here in Pakistan, and the government here is tying it directly to the war in Iran. Now, Pakistan is highly dependent on imported oil, a large amount of which comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And in fact, this is the second time that Pakistan's government has increased the price of fuel since the conflict began, which means that petrol has now increased 77% since the beginning of this conflict, and diesel by 87%. Now, Pakistan's government did announce some subsidies for certain groups, including motorcycle users, small farmers, passenger buses, amongst them. But the major concern is that this will filter into inflation, and many here in Pakistan will already be making assessments about how often and how far they travel.
Caroline Davies in Islamabad. Whether you are joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.